Ever watch like one of those courtroom shows, on TV, and you're just like, wait, hold on. How is that even allowed?
Uh-huh. Yeah, you know what you mean.
Well, get ready because we're about to go deep, really deep into all that courtroom drama
Buckle.
with Nancy Grace and her book Objection.
Oh yeah, she's a firecracker.
She is. We've got excerpts from the book, some articles about it. Even I think we found a podcast episode somewhere all about like dissecting her whole career and approach.
It's gonna be a wild ride for sure.
Oh, yeah, it is for sure. So what really struck me is like how she's always, presenting herself as this champion of justice, like almost like a vigilante,
Yeah.
but for victims.
Hmm.
But then when you like actually look closer, it's like, whoa, some of her views like totally contradict those very principles. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? There's definitely some contradictions there, especially when you look at her personal story, the murder of her fiance Keith Griffin.
Right.
She talks about it as this like, life-altering experience. Yeah.
That basically set her on this path, like ignited this passion for law and fighting for justice. But
But then you compare her very emotional account, with the actual facts of the case, and well, things get a little fuzzy.
yeah, they don't quite line up, do they? And it really makes you think,
Yeah.
like how much of our personal experiences, especially when they're so traumatic,
Oh, for sure.
how much do they shape our views on justice, on the whole system, on what's
Yeah.
right and wrong?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like to want retribution, to want justice for someone you love, that's natural, human even.
Totally.
But when you're the one with
Mm-hmm.
the power to actually put people behind bars, I mean, that personal drive can be a dangerous thing, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's what we see a lot with Grace, especially when it comes to her views on defense attorneys.
Oh yeah, they're like the villains in her story.
Pretty much, yeah. She really seems to believe they're more concerned with sneaky tactics and winning, than with the actual truth or justice. It's like she takes it personally,
Yeah.
almost as if, like, by defending someone, no matter how awful the crime, you're somehow guilty by association.
Right, but it's important to remember our legal system is designed to be adversarial.
Right.
Defense attorneys are there to protect the rights of the accused. Everyone deserves a fair trial. That's the whole point. And sometimes I think Grace forgets that, or maybe just chooses to ignore it to fit her narrative.
Yeah, and the crazy part is some of the examples she uses in the book to support her arguments, they really don't hold up.
Like what?
Like, she criticizes Mark Garagos a lot.
Oh, Scott Peterson's lawyer.
Yeah, she criticizes him for, like, being sarcastic in court, like joking around.
But that trial went on for months.
Oh.
It was a media circus.
I mean, are a couple sarcastic comments and jokes really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things?
Exactly. And you know what else she fails to mention?
What?
Prosecutors can be just as theatrical, just as aggressive, maybe even more so.
Oh, for sure.
It's like she's cherry-picking these moments, to fit her narrative, but without actually showing if this behavior is, like, widespread among defense attorneys or if it really does actually harm the pursuit of justice.
It's like she's building this case against all defense attorneys based on a few isolated incidents.
Mm-hmm. And then she gets to this really interesting part about murderabilia.
Oh, yeah.
She is like furious that people can actually profit from selling, items connected to notorious murders.
But isn't that, like, a bit hypocritical?
What do you mean?
I mean, she literally has made a whole career out of true crime media, which, let's be honest, also profits from our fascination with murder.
Whoa, you're right. It's like she's saying, it's wrong for others to cash in on these tragedies, but somehow it's okay for her to do it.
Yeah.
Doesn't quite add up, does it?
It really doesn't. And it really raises some uncomfortable questions, don't you think, about the whole true crime genre. Like, are we, the viewers, the listeners, are WE part of the problem? Are we exploiting these victims by tuning in and being entertained by these stories? It's definitely something to think about.
It is.
Then there's like her whole thing about how criminals are portrayed. Like, she complains about defendants getting these makeovers before trial. New suits, haircuts, media coaching to make them seem more sympathetic to the jury.
Yeah, like she almost wants them to look guilty.
Right. Like she even uses the Menendez brothers and them wearing pastels at their trial as an example.
Oh, I remember that.
Like, come on, what's that got to do with anything?
Yeah, and don't forget her obsession with mugshots.
Oh, yeah, she's a big proponent of, like, publishing them everywhere.
Which can, perpetuate all kinds of biases and make it harder for people to reintegrate into society after they've served their time.
It's like she wants to strip away any shred of humanity from the accused to make it easier to see them as monsters and not as people who deserve a fair trial, It's pretty scary when you think about it.
Absolutely. It goes against the whole idea of innocent until proven guilty, and it completely ignores all the factors that contribute to crime in the first place. Poverty, lack of opportunity, mental health struggles. I mean, these are all things that she doesn't really address.
She seems to prefer a, much simpler view,
Yeah.
like good versus evil with no room for nuance or complexity.
Right. And then she gets into juries, which is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah, because according to her, they're just, easily swayed by everything.
Right. By the lawyers, the defendant's image, and of course the media. It's like she thinks jurors are just too gullible to see the truth for themselves.
Yeah, it's almost like she doesn't trust everyday people to serve on a jury and to actually make, sound judgments based on the evidence.
Which brings us to her, shall we say, interesting take on the Constitution.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
She claims to love it, but then she's constantly criticizing how it protects defendants' rights.
Classic case of wanting it both ways.
Exactly. Like, she wants the power to convict, but without the state being bound by the very laws that are supposed to protect individuals from overreach and injustice.
And then, she leans into this whole woe is me story about prosecuting.
Oh, yeah. Overworked, underpaid, fighting this uphill battle against, these defense attorneys and their clients' rights.
But come on, when you compare, what prosecutors make to public defenders, it's clear she's twisting the truth to fit her agenda.
Totally. I mean, most defendants can barely even afford a decent defense.
She really likes to, flip the script.
She does.
But in all this tough talk, and the posturing about being a champion for victims, there are a few, surprisingly vulnerable moments in the book, where she shares these, personal experiences that kind of shed light on the sexism that women, especially women in law, have faced.
Right. Like, she talks about being called derogatory names in court, inappropriate comments, even a defense attorney trying to, control what she wore to court.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful reminder that gender bias exists on both sides of the courtroom.
Absolutely. And it's important to acknowledge her experiences and, to validate how she felt.
Of course. But the thing is, she doesn't really connect this to the wider problem of bias in the system as a whole.
Yeah.
For both defendants and legal professionals.
Yeah, it feels like a missed opportunity to really explore the complexities of gender and power dynamics in the courtroom. Like, she acknowledges sexism, but not its systemic impact.
Exactly. And her focus on her own experiences with sexism, it doesn't really translate to any empathy for defendants facing similar biases based on race, class, or other factors. It's like she's got blinders on when it comes to that.
That's a good point.
Now, let's talk about juries, because that's where Grace really lets loose. So juries, she really does not hold back.
No, she doesn't.
It's almost like she sees them as the weakest link in the whole justice system,
Yeah, too easily manipulated, not able to separate fact from fiction,
Yeah. And she actually suggests, harsher penalties for jurors who she thinks, mess up.
Oh, yeah, she goes there.
Even, talking about charging them with crimes if they don't, follow their oath to the letter.
Which is, I mean, pretty extreme.
It's intense. Imagine getting hit with criminal charges just because you voiced an opinion that differed from hers, or forgot some tiny detail during a trial.
I mean, it's pretty intimidating.
Right.
Yeah, talk about intimidating. I mean, I think people would just avoid jury duty altogether.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
And then she has these, other ideas that are, kind of out there, too.
Oh, yeah, what?
Like screening potential jurors based on, what news they consume. Yeah, or even, running credit checks to see if they've ever, been sued before. Okay, that's getting into some pretty ethically murky territory, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that, super discriminatory? What does someone's credit score, or their taste in news, for that matter, have to do with their ability to judge evidence fairly?
I mean, nothing. Honestly, it just raises a lot of concerns, doesn't it?
Like, what's to stop them from using this like media screening to weed out people with certain political views that, she doesn't agree with? And credit checks, that's just not fair. And it's totally irrelevant.
Totally agree. I mean, it's like she wants a jury pool full of people with like no opinions, no life experiences, no financial struggles,
Right.
Completely detached from the real world.
Right. Like living in a bubble.
Yeah, exactly. And I hate to break it to her, but that's just a recipe for a jury that's going to be totally unrepresentative of the community and likely to be swayed by whatever story the prosecution presents.
I mean, and it's clear that her obsession with those like big, splashy, famous trials, the
Yeah.
ones that are all over the news,
Right.
that really, really warps her whole perspective.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like she keeps bringing up O.J. Simpson, right?
Yeah, of course.
Claiming that the jury's not guilty verdict was this total failure of justice. Like the system completely failed.
I mean, but we have to remember, right? The OJ trial was a media frenzy unlike anything we'd ever seen before. And I probably ever will again.
Is a total outlier.
Exactly. So to use that one single case to claim that juries are routinely, tricked or incompetent, it's just not backed up by any real evidence.
Right. And then she uses the Scott Peterson case too to kind of make the same point.
Ah, yes, the Geragos connection.
Right, arguing that his tactics, Mark Geragos, almost caused a mistrial.
Which, they did.
They did, but Peterson was convicted in the end, so what's her point?
I think in her mind, any defense strategy that even attempts to challenge the prosecution or poke holes in the case, that's automatically seen as like this threat to justice,
It's like, how dare they do their jobs?
Right. It's like she wants defense attorneys to just roll over and say, okay, you got us, you win,
That's not how it works.
Exactly.
And she focuses on like these super specific moments in these trials, and it's always to fit her narrative,
Right. Like we're thinking of the juror incident, right, in the Peterson case.
Yeah.
Where they were, allegedly making that like okay sign to the defendant.
Right. I mean, that was definitely concerning.
It was, yeah, but it led to a mistrial, which means the system worked.
It did.
The judge saw that there was potential bias and took action to ensure a fair trial.
Right. But she uses that one tiny little anecdote as like proof that juror misconduct is like rampant.
Mm-hmm.
Without any real data to back it up or even considering the context.
Yeah, that's her MO, isn't it?
It really is. It's like she's taking these isolated incidents, these moments that happen in a very small percentage of cases, and she's like blowing them up
into this like huge panic.
Yes. As if juries are just completely out of control, like running wild, and the whole system is about to like collapse.
And that kind of fear-mongering, it's powerful.
Right.
It taps into our anxieties about crime and makes us more open to her calls for, tougher punishments, stricter control over everything.
Yeah, it's like she's appealing to our gut reactions instead of, encouraging us to actually think critically about the complexities of the justice system and how it works.
How it doesn't work.
And we can't forget the media's role in all of this, right? I mean, Grace herself is a product of this media landscape that thrives on these sensational crime stories. And, her show and others like it, they often present like this very distorted view of what justice is and how it plays out. It's always focused on the most shocking cases, the most outlandish crimes, and it amplifies the voices of people who just want retribution, like immediately.
And that kind of coverage, it shapes how we view everything, how we view crime, how we view punishment, and the role of the courts in society.
Yeah, it makes it so much harder to have these nuanced conversations about these issues, about crime and punishment and rehabilitation and how to actually like push for meaningful reforms.
Absolutely. And it contributes to the dehumanization of defendants, It's easier to see them as monsters when you only hear about the worst of the worst and you don't hear their stories, their side of the story.
It's like we're being trained to see justice as this win or lose game where the only like acceptable outcome is a conviction and a harsh sentence. And anything less than that is seen as a failure.
Yeah, it's a dangerous mindset and it makes it so much harder to even begin to address the root causes of crime and to advocate for policies that prioritize rehabilitation and reintegration over just punishment.
And Grace's book, with its emphasis on these sensational, high-profile cases, and this demonization of anyone who dares to defend people accused of crimes, it just fits right into that narrative.
Yeah, she offers this solution that sounds tempting, but it's incredibly dangerous. Strip away defendants' rights and just give prosecutors even more power.
It's chilling when you really think about it.
It is, and it's a solution that completely ignores the complexities of human behavior and the flaws that are inherent in our justice system and the importance of protecting individual liberties, even for those accused of the most horrific crimes.
It's fundamental, right? That's what makes our system, at least in theory, different.
It is, or it should be.
But, even with all her, criticism of defense attorneys and all her anxieties about juries being, tricked or whatever, she does make a few surprisingly reasonable points.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like, she suggests letting jurors take notes during the trial.
Oh, I mean, that's a common sense reform that a lot of experts support.
Yeah, it seems so simple.
I know, right? It's like jurors are tasked with processing tons of information, often very complicated information. So taking notes, I mean, that just helps them remember the key details and to understand the evidence better.
Makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And she also argues for giving juries, written copies of the relevant laws, which, also seems fair.
Right. Like acknowledge that the law can be complicated.
So complicated.
And that jurors who are, often just everyday people without any legal background, they need clear guidance to make these informed decisions.
It's like she has this moment of clarity,
Yeah.
where she's like, oh, okay, maybe juries actually need tools and resources to do their job well.
Yeah, and then like a switch flips and she's back to distrust and fear,
Like she suggests that jurors can't be trusted to discuss the case outside of the courtroom, and she proposes all these limits on their access to media coverage.
It's like she takes one step forward and then two steps back, unable to reconcile her belief in the idea of juries, with her deep suspicion of their competence and ability to do the right thing.
And I think that tension, between wanting this system that's both ruthlessly efficient and super punitive.
Right, where guilt is always obvious, convictions are quick, and the punishments are severe, no messing around.
But she fails to grasp, I think, that a system that prioritizes speed and certainty over everything else, over fairness, over due process.
It's a system that's going to make mistakes.
Big ones.
Big ones. And it's going to create injustice.
And that's what's so scary about it. So we've talked about defense attorneys, we've talked about juries, but where does the Constitution actually fit into all of this, with Nancy Grace?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is. She claims to have this deep respect for it.
Right.
But then she's constantly criticizing how it, protects the rights of defendants, especially when it comes to due process.
Well, it is a complex relationship, isn't it? I mean, she clearly sees the Constitution as the bedrock of our legal system, but then she gets so frustrated when those same protections, the ones that are meant to ensure a fair trial for everyone, when those get in the way of what she sees as swift and decisive justice.
Right, especially when she's talking about these horrific crimes.
Exactly, yeah. It's in her mind, due process is this obstacle course for prosecutors to navigate instead of, this fundamental safeguard against wrongful convictions.
And I think that tension, that struggle, between her respect for the Constitution and her desire for this more efficient and punitive system,
Yeah.
it becomes even more apparent when she starts talking about prosecutorial power.
Oh yeah, for sure. She really leans into this image of prosecutors as these overworked, underpaid heroes, battling against a system that's rigged in favor of criminals.
And she even throws in some personal anecdotes.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
About her car breaking down on the way to court, or just to kind of illustrate how hard their jobs are. And she contrasts that with this image of these high-priced defense attorneys, living these lavish lifestyles while scheming to free their guilty clients.
Yeah, it's a very compelling narrative, and it definitely resonates with people who are already frustrated with the justice system and how they perceive it as being inefficient.
But it ignores this huge power imbalance that exists between the state, with all its resources, and the individual,
Yeah.
especially for defendants who are already disadvantaged or marginalized.
Exactly. And her focus on those high profile cases, the O.J. Simpsons, the Scott Petersons, those are not typical.
At all.
They're outliers.
Those defendants, they had access to so many resources, top-tier lawyers, media strategists, all that. Most defendants can't even afford a decent lawyer, let alone a whole team of people working to, spin their story in the media.
Right. So to generalize from those cases and claim that the system is just like inherently biased in favor of all criminals, it's just misleading.
It is. And for all her anxieties about, criminals manipulating the system, she does reveal these little glimpses into her own experiences with bias in the courtroom.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like she talks about being, subjected to derogatory remarks and just constant scrutiny of her appearance and even facing like a motion from a defense attorney that tried to like dictate what she could wear to court.
It's a pretty powerful reminder that gender bias exists on both sides of the courtroom.
It does. And
Yeah.
and while she doesn't like explicitly connect those experiences to the broader issue of gender bias in the system, it does raise some important questions about how our personal experiences, how they shape our understanding of fairness and due process and what justice should look like.
Yeah, it's like she's acknowledging that it exists, but not really grappling with its systemic impact.
So we spent a lot of time with Nancy Grace and her arguments, her critiques of defense attorneys and juries and her complicated relationship with the Constitution.
Right.
What's the big takeaway here?
Well, I think objection serves as this really powerful reminder that our perception of the justice system, how we view it, it's often shaped by these high profile cases, by what we see in the media. And it's easy to get swept up in all the drama and sensationalism and lose sight of the complexities and the nuances and the systemic issues that are affecting the vast majority of cases, the ones that never make headlines.
So what can we do with this information? What can people listening do?
Well, I think it's important to go deeper, to look beyond the headlines, to explore issues like wrongful convictions, the media's influence on public perception, and the challenges that public defenders face every day.
Don't just accept what you hear, Engage with diverse perspectives, challenge your own assumptions, and advocate for a justice system that is truly fair and equitable and accountable to everyone.
That's what it's all about.
And if you found this deep dive into Nancy Grace's world thought-provoking, subscribe for more nuanced explorations of complex topics. We promise to keep you informed, engaged, and maybe even a little outraged.